All right, so ready to take a deep dive into something that's way more interesting than it sounds. We're talking about mastering the ins and outs of driving a commercial vehicle safely. And trust me, this isn't your grandma's driver's ed class. We're going way beyond the basics here.
That's right. It's about really understanding the why behind those safe driving techniques, especially when you're dealing with a vehicle that's got a bit more weight and power behind it.
I used to think I was a pretty good driver, but then I actually started looking into all this expert advice.
Yeah.
And honestly, I was kind of blown away by all the little things I didn't know, even something as basic as accelerating. It's not just putting the pedal to the metal, is it?
You hit the nail on the head there. How you accelerate, it really has an impact on everything. We're talking wear and tear on your vehicle, how much fuel you're using, even how smooth the ride is for your passengers.
So no more pretending I'm in a race car then, even when I'm in a hurry.
It's tempting, I know, but a nice, smooth acceleration is always going to be the best way to go. Think about it this way. When you slam on the gas, it's like putting a ton of stress on the engine and the transmission. Kind of like when you sprint at full speed, your body feels that stress. Do it too much, and you're going to end up with problems.
That makes sense. So those jerky starts can actually lead to needing repairs sooner. I never really thought about it like that.
Absolutely. And it's not just the engine and transmission either. One of the guides we looked at, it mentioned that hard acceleration can be really tough on the coupling in a tractor trailer. What is that
Yeah, I
exactly?
was wondering about that too. What happens if that gets damaged?
Well, that coupling is a heavy-duty piece of equipment. It's what connects the truck, the tractor, to the trailer that it's pulling. So it's got to be strong to keep those two huge parts working together.
Oh, so it's like the thing that keeps them from, well, coming apart.
Exactly. If that coupling gets damaged because of rough driving, you could have a real dangerous situation on your hands. Imagine those two parts separating while you're on the highway. Not good.
Definitely not. Okay, so smooth acceleration it is. What about starting on a hill? Especially with a manual transmission, I always get a little nervous.
Starting on a hill, that's where things can get a little tricky, especially with a manual. You definitely don't want to be rolling backwards into the car behind you, that's for sure.
Yeah, hadn't really thought about it like that, but you're right. So how do you actually prevent that rollback when you're on an incline, especially with a manual transmission?
It's all about finding that sweet spot. You've got your clutch, your gas pedal, and if you really need it, that parking brake. Imagine you're on a steep hill. You want to engage the clutch just a bit before you take your foot off the brake. At the same time, you give it just enough gas so the engine doesn't stall.
Okay, I think I'm following so far.
And if you need a little extra help, that parking brake is your friend. It's like a safety net to keep you from rolling back. Once you can feel the engine pulling you forward, then you can slowly release the parking brake and keep accelerating smoothly.
It's like a dance between all the pedals.
That's a great way to put it. It takes a bit of practice, but once you get the hang of it, you'll be amazed at how smoothly you can start, even on those hills that seem practically vertical.
I'm ready to give it a try. Okay, so we've covered smooth starts. What about another driving fundamental, holding the steering wheel the right way?
Steering. That's your connection to the road. It might seem as easy as just putting your hands at 10 and 2, but there's more to it than you might think.
I was just thinking about that. It seems a little old school now, but maybe those driving instructors yelling 10 and 2 were onto something.
You're right, it might sound a bit outdated, but that hand placement, it all comes down to being in control, especially when you think about all those unexpected things you can hit out there on the road.
You mean like potholes? Because I swear, I hit every single one.
Exactly. So think about this. You're driving along, not a care in the world, and suddenly, bam, you hit a pothole you didn't even see coming.
Yeah.
If you don't have a good grip on the wheel, that impact, it can actually jerk the steering wheel right out of your hands.
And then you end up, who knows where. Okay, that's a little scary. So what's the big deal with the hand placement then? Does it really make that much of a difference?
It can be the difference between staying safe and having an accident. Picture the same situation, you hit that pothole, but this time, you've got a firm grip on the wheel, hands right at that classic 10 and 2. What happens? You might feel the bump, but you don't lose control because you're able to hold on tight and keep the car going straight.
So it's like having a safety net for my steering.
Exactly. And it's not just about potholes. Think about having to swerve quickly to avoid something in the road. That firm grip, it becomes really important. It lets you react quickly and stay safe. And when you're really paying attention to the road like that, it also helps you anticipate what's coming up ahead.
Right, like that whole defensive driving thing, always thinking one
Right.
step ahead. And speaking of staying ahead, I guess, let's talk about braking. Seems pretty simple on the surface. You hit the brakes when you need to slow down or stop, right?
You'd be surprised. There are a lot of drivers out there, even experienced ones, who don't really get how important good braking technique is, especially with a heavy vehicle.
Really, what kind of mistakes do people make? It's just braking, isn't it?
One of the biggest ones is slamming on the brakes. You don't want to do that unless it's a real emergency.
So no more panic slips unless I really have to.
Exactly. Think of your brakes like you're having a conversation, okay? Slamming on the brakes is like suddenly cutting someone off. It's jarring. It's not polite.
Okay, I like that analogy.
You want to brake gradually. It's like a natural pause in a conversation. You're still in control, and it gives everyone time to adjust.
So even in a situation where I have to stop quickly, gradual is still better.
Exactly. You want to apply firm, steady pressure. Don't just stomp on the brakes and send everyone flying forward. Now, the guide also mentioned something about the clutch when you're stopping with a manual transmission, something about engaging it close to idle. What's that all about?
I was a little fuzzy on that part too, to be honest. Why is that technique so important?
Well, it all comes down to how the weight of the vehicle shifts when you brake. Imagine you're standing on a bus and it comes to a sudden stop. Oh, yeah, you have to grab onto something.
Right. All that weight shifts forward,
Yeah.
and just like you have to adjust your balance, your vehicle has to do the same thing,
Yeah.
especially when it's carrying a heavy load.
So how does engaging the clutch help with that?
By engaging the clutch close to idle as you're braking, you're basically smoothing out that weight transfer. It helps the vehicle stay stable and in control.
Wow. So much to think about with braking. Okay, what about when you're driving in hilly areas? I've heard about brakes overheating, but is that really something I need to worry about?
Definitely something to be aware of, especially if you're doing a lot of downhill driving. Brakes overheat when they're being used too much. So going down a steep hill and riding your brakes the whole way, that's a recipe for trouble.
So what happens if your brakes overheat? Is it just a matter of them not working as well? It can be really dangerous. Think about it. Your brakes are what stop your vehicle. If they fail, you have a serious problem. It's like running a marathon with no training. You're pushing yourself too hard, and eventually, something's got to give.
So what's the best way to handle those long downhill stretches?
You want to use engine braking and downshifting to help control your speed. Don't rely on your brakes alone.
Good tip. Okay, next up, something I think everyone dreads, a little backing up. I swear I hold my breath every time I have to get into a tight parking spot.
Backing up can be tricky. You've got limited visibility, you're in a tight space, there could be obstacles you don't even see.
Tell me about it. I'm pretty sure I've almost hit those concrete barriers in parking lots more times than I can count. What's the key to not freaking out when you have to back up?
First of all, if you can avoid backing up altogether, do it. If you can pull through a parking space instead of backing in, for example, that's always a good choice.
Yeah, I guess sometimes it's worth taking an extra minute to find a spot you can pull through. But let's be real, sometimes you just got to back up.
Right. So when backing up is unavoidable, make sure you take your time and really check your surroundings. If you can hop out of the car for a second and actually look to see what's behind you, even better.
I'll admit, I usually just rely on my backup camera.
Backup cameras are great, don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
but they can't show you everything, and sometimes they make distances look a little off.
Okay, good to know. So check those mirrors, walk around if I can, take it slow. What else?
Here's a good one. Whenever possible, try to back up and turn towards the driver's side.
Really? Does it make that much of a difference?
It can. When you back up on the driver's side, you can look out your window, and you've got a clear view of what's behind you.
Oh, that makes sense. So much easier than just using the mirrors.
Right. It's
Yeah.
all about having as much information as possible. Speaking of which, let's talk about shifting gears.
You know, the gear shift is still a bit of a mystery to me. Like, I haven't quite figured out all its secrets. But is it really that important to understand all that if I'm not driving a big truck?
Even if you're not driving a big rig, knowing how to use your gears the right way can make a big difference. It can actually make you a safer driver, believe it or not.
Okay, so it's more than just moving that lever around. What about this double clutching thing they talk about in the guide, especially for trucks with manual transmissions? That sounds like something race car drivers do.
Double clutching, it sounds complicated, but it's actually pretty simple once you get the hang of it. It's a way of making sure the engine speed and the transmission speed match up when you're shifting gears.
Why is that so important, though?
Imagine trying to jump onto one of those moving walkways at the airport.
It totally done that.
If you try to jump on when it's moving at a different speed than you are, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah, you could fall flat on your face.
Exactly. Double clutching is like making sure you're moving at the same speed as the walkway before you step on. It's all about making a smooth transition.
So it's all about things being in sync.
You got it. And even though you might not need to do double clutching in a regular car, the idea is the same. Smooth and controlled gear changes are always the goal.
That makes sense. Now, what about those of us who drive automatics? Do we even need to think about gears?
Well, automatic transmissions do a lot of the work for you, that's for sure. But understanding how those gears work can still make you a better driver.
Okay, so don't just put it in drive and forget about it. What are some things I should keep in mind?
One thing is to remember that those lower gears, they're not just for show. They can be really useful, especially when you're going downhill.
Oh, right, like we were talking about with engine braking, using the gears to help control your speed.
Exactly. And some newer cars with automatic transmissions, they have something called progressive shifting.
Progressive shifting. That sounds intense.
It's actually pretty cool. Basically, instead of shifting at the same points all the time, the transmission actually adjusts when it shifts based on what you're doing, like how much weight you have in the car or even the weather conditions.
So it's like the car's thinking ahead for me.
Exactly. It makes for a smoother, more efficient ride.
That is pretty cool. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Smooth acceleration, braking the right way, how to hold the steering wheel like a pro, and even all about gears. I feel like I should be getting some kind of advanced driving certificate.
It's like we've been on a road trip ourselves learning all about these skills, and now it's about putting them all together.
And seeing how they all connect, right? It's not just about knowing the rules, but understanding how they all work together to make you a better, safer driver.
Exactly. And that brings us to what I think is the most important thing we've talked about today: anticipation.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Yeah.
We talked about specific techniques like how to accelerate, how to brake, but you're saying there's something even bigger than that.
I think so. Imagine this: you're driving, and you're constantly looking around you, checking your mirrors, not just reacting to what's right in front of you, but thinking about what could happen a few steps ahead.
So instead of just reacting to things, you're trying to anticipate them.
Exactly. Like you develop this sense for the road, almost like a sixth sense, that helps you spot those potential hazards before they even become a problem.
And I bet that's even more important when you're driving a larger vehicle like we've been talking about.
Absolutely. You've got those blind spots to think about, and it takes longer to stop, longer to maneuver. So that awareness, it's really key.
I'm starting to see how all these skills we've been talking about, like smooth acceleration, being in control of your brakes, steering correctly, being careful when you back up, it all comes together to help you become that more aware, more proactive driver.
Exactly. It's like all these skills, they're tools in your toolkit. And the more you practice, the more you use those tools, the more confident you're going to feel behind the wheel.
So for everyone out there listening who wants to become a better driver, just remember, it's not just about getting to your destination. It's about enjoying the ride, but also being safe and in control.
Well said. Keep those skills sharp and stay aware out there.
And who knows, you might just surprise yourself with how much you can learn and how far you can go. That's all we have for this deep dive. Until next time, drive safe, everyone.